They were not afraid of death. They were afraid of wasting their lives. When most people think about Vikings, they imagine ruthless warriors charging into battle without fear, driven by violence and a desire for conquest. But that image tells only a small part of the story. The real secret behind the Viking world was not their weapons, their ships, or even their military success. It was their psychology. The Vikings lived in one of the harshest environments in Europe. Scandinavia offered little room for comfort. Winters were long, farmland was limited, and survival was never guaranteed. A bad harvest, a brutal winter, or a single mistake could threaten an entire community. In such conditions, people could not afford to build their lives around comfort or security. They had to build them around resilience. This environment shaped a very different way of thinking from the one most people have today. Modern societies often encourage us to avoid discomfort, reduce risk, and seek stability. Viking society taught the opposite lesson. Life was unpredictable, hardship was unavoidable, and uncertainty was a permanent part of existence. The goal was not to eliminate these realities, but to become strong enough to face them. This philosophy began in childhood. Viking children were expected to contribute to the household at an early age and gradually take on real responsibilities. The purpose was not to create fearless warriors but capable adults. Modern psychology shows that resilience develops through exposure to manageable challenges. The Vikings discovered this principle long before it had a scientific name. By learning to face difficulty early, people became better prepared for the hardships that would inevitably come later. One of the greatest misconceptions about Vikings is the idea that they did not feel fear. Fear is a natural human response, and the Vikings were no different from anyone else. What made them unique was their relationship with fear. They understood that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. A person's value was measured not by how they felt, but by how they behaved when circumstances became difficult. This idea was closely connected to honor, one of the most important concepts in Viking culture. Today, many people define themselves through personal feelings, achievements, or individual goals. Vikings defined themselves largely through reputation. In small communities where survival depended on cooperation, trust was everything. A person's reputation determined whether others would support them, trade with them, or stand beside them when times became hard. For that reason, honor was not simply a matter of pride. It was a practical necessity. Losing your reputation could mean losing the trust of the community, and losing that trust could have serious consequences in a world where no one survived alone. Honor functioned as a form of social capital, creating bonds that helped people endure uncertainty together. Their attitude toward death reveals even more about how they viewed life. Most cultures try to reduce anxiety by offering certainty about the future or about what happens after death. The Viking worldview approached the problem differently. Rather than denying uncertainty, it accepted it. Death would come, failure would come, loss would come. These realities could not be avoided, so there was little value in obsessing over them. This perspective was reflected throughout Norse mythology. Odin, the most important of the Norse gods, was not portrayed as all-powerful. He sacrificed for wisdom, endured suffering, and knew that the final battle of Ragnarok would eventually destroy the world. The gods were aware of their fate, yet they continued to fight anyway. That idea carries a powerful psychological lesson. Meaning does not come from guaranteed success. It comes from action, effort, and commitment even when the outcome is uncertain. The Vikings admired individuals who continued forward despite knowing that failure was possible. Their stories taught people to focus on what they could control, their actions, their courage, and their character rather than worrying endlessly about what they could not. Modern psychology increasingly points toward similar conclusions. Research on resilience shows that accepting reality often leads to greater psychological strength than trying to resist it. Studies on purpose suggest that people thrive when they commit themselves to meaningful goals despite uncertainty. Acceptance-based therapies teach that many forms of anxiety become less powerful when people stop fighting unavoidable facts and instead learn how to live alongside them. Without realizing it, the Vikings built an entire culture around these principles. Their environment forced them to confront challenges that modern people often spend their lives trying to avoid. As a result, they developed a mindset that allowed them to endure hardship, adapt to uncertainty, and find meaning in a world that offered few guarantees. This does not mean that Viking society was perfect, or that modern people should try to live as Vikings did. Their world was often violent, dangerous, and unforgiving. However, the psychological lessons hidden within their culture remain surprisingly relevant. They remind us that strength is not created by comfort, that courage is not the absence of fear, and that uncertainty is not a problem that can be permanently solved. Perhaps the most important lesson is that life becomes meaningful not when we eliminate risk, suffering, or mortality, but when we learn to face them honestly. The Vikings understood that death was inevitable, and because of that, they placed enormous value on how a person chose to live. Their psychology was not built on fearlessness, it was built on acceptance. Acceptance of hardship, acceptance of uncertainty, and acceptance of mortality. From that acceptance came resilience, purpose, and the determination to act even when there were no guarantees. That may be the real reason the Vikings continue to fascinate us today. Beneath the stories of reigns and battles lies a much deeper idea, a recognition that life is temporary, that challenges are unavoidable, and that meaning comes from the way we respond to both. They were not afraid of death. They were afraid of reaching the end of life and discovering that they had never truly lived.